Hey y'all, it's Dr. Know-It-All. I am super happy to be able to talk about the FSD Beta 11 release notes according to Not a Tesla app, which is where I'm getting this from, and I'm counting on them to be accurate about this all. I don't have photographic evidence except for the very first page, but anyway, I'm going to assume that it's correct. I'm recording this at about 6:30 in the evening on Saturday, the 12th of November, and I'll do an addendum because I'm not going to release this till tomorrow morning, but I'll do an addendum in the morning if there's more release notes that come after this, basically. But anyway, I wanted to show where this is coming from. But what I want to talk about is what we've got in the Not a Tesla app and what they've shown here. So it says partial release notes, so just remember that that's the case. Okay, so the very first thing is the big ticket item. It's been the elephant in the room basically since, gosh, a long time ago. Elon's been talking about version 11 and the single stack to rule them all. I actually did a video on that. I don't even remember how long ago that was, but I'll put a link to it just in case you're interested. But yeah, it was called single stack to rule them all. But basically the idea here is that the highway stack, as we're going to see in just a second, is very old. It's legacy software. And so they're finally updating it. The problem with the highway stack is that even though it's legacy software, it actually has worked pretty reasonably well with a few very obvious and annoying exceptions. It actually worked really well. So I think they were like, until we can actually definitively get this better than the highway stack was, why mess with it, right? But at some point they had to do this. So now they've gone ahead and they've put the single stack, which is the stuff that you drive around in city streets for, onto the highway stack. And for those who watch these videos or who drive full self-driving, it's the part where you see the red sidelines and everything, and you see the yellow medians. The graphics are much more extensive than they are on the highway. When you go on the highway, it kind of goes to this very just plain gray. You see cars and you see some lane indications, but you don't see, a lot of the much more interesting information that you get with the full self-driving beta. All right, anyway, so let's go ahead and read this and then the other notes as well. So first of all here, enabled FSD beta on highway. This unifies the vision and planning stack, so good, on and off highway and replaces the legacy highway stack, which is over 4 years old. Damn. The legacy highway stack still relies on several single camera and single frame networks and was set up to handle simple lane specific maneuvers. FSD beta's multi-camera video networks and next gen planner that allows for more complex agent interactions with less reliance on lanes makes way for adding more intelligent behaviors, smoother control, and better decision making. All right, so let's begin at the begin. This unifies the vision and planning stack. So it's not just the vision stack. It's not just detecting the world. It's also making policy decisions about what it's going to do. And that's going to fix a bunch of the bugaboos that we've seen with the legacy version of the highway stack, including very timid lane changes, requiring user input. You have to actually press the stalk to get it to change lanes. Very bad at merging and on and off the highway, and just a lot of situations where it's rather timid. Again, it lane keeps really well. It does a good job, but there's some very specific parts that it was obviously not working on. So anyway, so it's not just the vision. It's not just detecting the world. It's also planning what it's going to do. That's also been upgraded to the full self-driving stack. So that's fantastic. And all of that stuff is very much neural network based, transformer based, et cetera. So then we get into the legacy stack. And if you think back, if it's over 4 years old, we're talking about 2018, and this was an entirely different, like basically everything about Tesla's full self-driving was different in 2018 than it is now. But it still relies on single cameras and single frame networks. So that means that basically it would look from one camera view at one frame and it would make determinations about things. And that obviously worked well for simple lane specific type, lane keeping and things like that. Again, it's better than pretty much all other auto manufacturers and autonomous vehicle manufacturers. It does an amazingly good job on the highway, but it's using very much more simple code than the stuff that's being used in full self-driving beta. So then we get to what's new. We get multi-camera video networks. So again, we're integrating all 8 cameras into a video feed that slides through time. So you've got a 360 view that's sliding through time. That makes things amazingly much better. So the video feed means that the highway stack now has access to time, which is a pretty good thing. So in other words, it can see things, it can see occluded things. If a car passes behind another car, it still knows it's there, that kind of stuff. And then of course you've got the new generation of planner, the planner that's able to take advantage of that and make plans and do things more assertively and more rapidly, and not that 3-second, that super annoying 3-second delay where it's like, oh, I want to pull out and make a turn, and then it's like 3 seconds with the turn signal on, and then it goes into the other lane. Those things are really annoying. I'm sure anybody who's driven on the autopilot stack, it doesn't matter whether it's full self-driving or just the old enhanced navigate on autopilot. But anyway, if you have, it sits there and it turns on the turn signal, and then it waits a really long time just for another car to come up behind it, and then it pulls out in front of them. So super annoying. So that's one of those really gripey problems that happens, but the next generation planner and access to video network should solve that. So anyway, like it says, it allows for more complex agent interactions with less reliance on specifically where lanes are, which should really help with merging and unmerging on highways. Because the problem is, what happens is the car is just set on dead centering. It's like I'm staying in the middle of the lane, but when you get a merge lane or something, the lane suddenly becomes 2 lanes wide. And so the car then jumps to the middle of that, and then it sits in the middle until right at the end of the lane when it shrinks back down, and then it goes bump and it goes back in. So this should make substantially smoother, edge case operations as it's getting on and off the highway and transferring things and going down in lanes and up in lanes and all of that kind of stuff. Anyway, so the overall effect is more intelligent behavior, smoother control, better decision making. This is, of course, now in the past, whenever I've driven full self-driving beta, I've always intentionally tried to not drive on the highway because I feel like that's been boring, and now I can include highway drives on my full self-driving. In fact, that'll be like the first thing I'll do is go on the highway and see how it behaves compared to the old version. So that's going to be super exciting. It sounds like the rollout could easily take until the end of December before everybody gets it, so I'm keeping my fingers crossed I won't be waiting that long. Hopefully I'll get it relatively early. I never did get 10.69.3, so I'm still waiting for a lot of that stuff. So anyway, we'll see, but this is very exciting. If you're not excited about any other part of the release notes, this should get you really excited because this is a huge step. This and kind of small-scale parking lot behavior, things like backing up and making U-turns and working around parking lots and stuff like that. Those are the the rest of the envelope for driving. And once it contains those things, so this is like a huge chunk of that. You've got somewhere around 90+% of all driving conditions now are covered by full self-driving beta, except for like some parking lot things, backing up, U-turns, stuff like that. And so that should hopefully be relatively easy for Tesla to be able to manage on top of this. But it's very exciting that this big chunk of the driving regime is now inside full self-driving beta. Super exciting stuff. And a big congratulations, by the way, to the Tesla team. Thank you guys so much for working so hard on this. I mean, it's amazing that this stuff keeps cranking along and keeps getting so much better every iteration. I really appreciate it for anybody who's watching. Thank you. All right, and from that relatively easy to understand part, we jump into more technical things. So let's take a look at the next one. First up, we've got improved occupancy networks recall for close-by obstacles and precision in severe weather conditions, good, with 4x increase in transformer spatial resolution, 20% increase in image featurizer. I'm not positive that's supposed to be feature or something like that. In image featurizer capacity, improved side camera calibration, and 260,000 more video training clips, real world and simulation. Okay, so first of all, occupancy networks. I'm not going to go back over this in great detail. I've done videos on this before. In fact, I'll put a link to that at the end of this video just to make sure that you can see that if you're interested. So anyway, occupancy networks sort of transform the world into geometry, into voxels that the car can see, and it basically just decides on whether they're occupied or not. So I don't know, props. So I've got this, right? So the car looks around the 3D space and it says empty, 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 full, 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 right? So it turns it into little cubes, and inside those cubes, it determines which cubes are full and which cubes are empty. And before it even cares about what those things are, in other words, geometry is above ontology, which is what Ashok talked about in his talk, which is the thing I'm referencing. Anyway, before it even understands the semantics or the ontology of what's going on in the scene, it just decides, is this occupied? Can I drive here? So that's the important part about occupancy networks. Anyway, occupancy network recall, if we remember, remember that recall is true positives over true positives plus false negatives. So the fewer false negatives you get, the better. And a false negative would be, again, if we use our prop here, if the occupancy network said nothing here and my car can drive through this, right? I'm imagining a model car here. So, little thing like this, it would be a bad thing to run into something large like my glasses holder, right? So basically it's able to see this better and not have as many false negatives, which is things that it doesn't see. It's much more important that the car be able to see even a few false positives. I mean, you don't want that either, but you really don't want false negatives. You don't want it thinking nothing is there when something is there. So that's a really, really big deal. So as it says, it's got much better recall for close by obstacles, and that would be things that are really close to the car. Again, as I talked to the engineers at AI Day 2022, they said that at the time, which was 10.69.1, I think was out, or 2 maybe. Anyway, it was like 30 centimeter cubes. So it was pretty big, right? It was a relatively low resolution thing, which was fine for sort of driving on the highway or driving in situations where everything's relatively far away. But when you have close up things, hint, hint, when you're trying to park without ultrasonic sensors and stuff, you need a much, much more refined voxel size. You need a smaller voxel size so you have better precision and better understanding of the world around you. So my understanding is that this is probably part and parcel of a better occupancy network. I haven't seen specific evidence that it's definitely the multi-resolution occupancy network, but when you take this together with the FSD 10.69.3 notes, it seems to me like we are hitting what, again, I was told by a Tesla engineer at AI Day was going to be multi-resolution voxels, which was basically they could become very small when needed and they could be very big when needed. So you can see far away at low resolution and you can see close up at high resolution. Often, you could think about it like human vision a little bit. We can see things that are close up in pretty good detail, and the far away stuff we don't really have to see in that good of a detail. It just matters that we can see something is there, right? We can see the sky. We don't see the sky in all of its wonderful detail and all the little bits of it or something like that, or trees that are against the horizon. We see them as trees. We don't see the minute details of the branches and the leaves. So that's effectively what's going on here is the occupancy network it's going from a single resolution where it's 120 meters with 30 centimeter cubes that are inside of it to something that's a multi-resolution thing where you have small voxels up close, maybe down to just a few centimeters, and then far away they could be, I guess far away they could be like, half a kilometer or something per cube side or something like that. I don't know if it would get that big, but basically it adjusts based on how far away things are, how fast it's going, stuff like that. So this is a really, really critical thing, and it's really important and very exciting that they've got that in this release. Also, precision, which remember is true positives, at least assuming that we're dealing with the mathematical definition of that. So again, that would be true positives over true positives plus false positives. So it means seeing things that aren't there. In severe weather, that could easily happen. Like imagine it's raining and the rain sort of forms something that might look like a car or a person for a second. So getting rid of false positives under severe weather conditions is actually a really good thing. It'll make the car drive with a great deal more confidence. So that's really, really good to see. So now we get to how they're doing this. They've increased the transformer's spatial resolutions. Transformer, again, is a neural network architecture. I've done a video on that. I'll put a link to that up above if you're interested in seeing that. But they've increased it by 4 times. So the spatial resolution is probably the voxels have generally shrunk by 4 times. I imagine that's what it is. Again, it's not exactly clear what they're saying, but basically it's able to resolve 4 times more space around it in more detail, more distance. It's not clear, but it's definitely a 400% increase is nothing to sneeze at, obviously. Then we get to a 20% increase in image feature capacity. I think that's what it is. Maybe it is a featurizer. Maybe that's the network that does it. But basically, it's able to see features better. It's able to divide up the scene better. And again, if we're talking about multi-resolution voxels that are smaller, and that would allow things to be defined more carefully, right? Instead of having to define everything in these gigantic cubes that are about the size of my head, if you could define things that were smaller, you could see things like a mouse or something like that that would be smaller than that. And so you could define that much better. So I'm guessing that that's where we're going with that. Again, some of these notes are just not clear, so you have to take a guess about that. But anyway, 20% increase is not 400% increase, but still, that's not so bad. And then also improved side camera calibration. That's interesting. So those are I assume the A and B pillar and then the repeater cameras on the side. Probably the way that they're actually synced up with each other and linked to each other. That's probably what they're talking about here. So better calibration equals better understanding of the world around it without as many aberrations or things like that. And finally, Tesla throws down the data gauntlet, I guess, or the data smackdown on everybody else. They threw into the mix 260,000 more video training clips, both real world and simulation. Very cool. So probably a lot of severe weather stuff they can simulate so they can get these conditions that are absolutely horrible and still know what's out there, still know the ground truth of that. 260,000 video clips times 8 cameras times 10 seconds per clip times about 36 frames per second is somewhere around 750 million video frames that they're talking about here. So this is just an absolutely incredible amount of data that they're funneling into this thing. And this is just, they've added this, right? This is an extra 260,000 video training clips. So it's not like this is the only thing they're training on. This is added on to whatever they were training on before, probably with a lot of edge cases, probably with a lot of close-up things and maybe parking and rain and snow and fog and all of that kind of stuff. So they were just able to throw this stuff in here. If you haven't seen my episode on why data is so king at Tesla and why Tesla has a basically insurmountable lead, assuming that full self-driving, autonomous driving has to be solved through massive data, they're pretty much unbeatable at this point. The only way somebody could beat them is if this is the wrong tree to be barking up, basically. Anyway, if you haven't seen that episode, please do watch it. It didn't get a ton of views. I did it in my office. It's not particularly great quality, but the content is worth watching. So definitely go and watch that when you get a chance to. Next up is really interesting here. Reduce the predicted velocity error of very close by motorcycles, scooters, wheelchairs, and pedestrians by 63.6%. To do this, we introduced a new data set of simulated adversarial high-speed vulnerable road users, or VRU interactions. This update improves autopilot control around fast-moving and cutting-in VRUs. So improving 63.6% or almost 64% in your ability to judge what's going on about pedestrians, cyclists, other types of vehicles and things like that, that could potentially be impinging on the car. In other words, not going with you, parallel to you, but cutting across you or cutting, diagonally across, things like that. This is a huge deal because the safety element and the ability for Tesla to get approved to drive robotaxis, this is going to be a critical part of that. And having the data that the car doesn't try to hit pedestrians who cut out in front of it, things like that, showing that it's actually safer than human beings is going to be a huge part of being able to allow robotaxis to work. And of course, from a humanitarian level, it's a good thing not to injure or potentially kill people who are vulnerable, which is why they're VRUs, right? So motorcycles, bicycles, pedestrians, wheelchairs, etc. Those are people who have no real protection. So the car is always going to win in an accident with them, even if the person is at fault. And the way they've done this is they've used their simulator to do this. What they've done is simulated adversarial high-speed VRU interactions. So imagine you're driving your car and a pedestrian standing by the road and just runs out right in front of the car. Or a cyclist is with you and just before you overtake that cyclist, they cross across the road. So you don't want to ever do those things in real life because they're incredibly dangerous, but you can use a simulator in these cases. You can literally have people try to hit the car, right? To run out and try to hit the car, things like that. You can have activities that would be very much edge cases in the real world because most people are not that stupid, but then again, there's dogs and things like that, so you never know. There are creatures or deer or things that do seem to like to want to get out in front of a car. But anyway, so it doesn't specifically say that it's dealing with animals here, but there are situations where you do have high-speed crossing type of things from animals or people, and you really want to make sure that you are, extra safe in those sorts of situations. Again, it doesn't matter whose fault it is. It could easily not be your fault as a vehicle operator if a person just runs across the road, but you would much rather not hit that person than explain to the police that you injured this person and it was their fault, right? So it's better not to have an accident at all than it is to try to figure out whose fault it is in that sort of situation. So this is great. It's wonderful that they're using simulation in this sort of circumstance because, again, this is just too dangerous to go out into the real world and seek out this data. Now, I'm sure there are instances in the real world and they may have used those to create the simulations, but it's still a much better idea that here they're using simulations to train the system up and make it better. This next release note is going to make Chuck Cook a happy camper. Improved creeping profile with higher jerk when creeping starts and ends. So first of all, what is jerk? Jerk is the third derivative of distance with regard to time. And I know that doesn't make any sense to people. But anyway, it's one more past acceleration. So if you think about velocity, that's how fast you're driving. Acceleration is how fast you're speeding up. And then jerk is that sort of like kind of motion that you do, right? So what you want when you're creeping is you want a little more assertive behavior. You want the car to kind of go like boop and go up and stop and go up and stop and things like that, instead of just kind of like, very like, oh, maybe I'll go, maybe I'll go, maybe I'll go. You don't want that sort of motion. You want it to be very definite about when it's starting to creep and when it's stopping creeping. And if we combine this with 10.69.3 release notes, it also does a better job of accelerating and decelerating with high-speed traffic. So all of this should make the car behave in a way that makes the human occupants of the car much more confident about the vehicle. Because one of the problems with creeping right now is it's just really, really slow and it doesn't have a real beginning and ending. It just kind of does this thing. And you're like, is the car going to stop? Is it actually moving? Is it creeping? What is it doing? So, this kind of like just a little jerk at the beginning, a little jerk at the end is going to make people feel much more confident. And then if the car really ramps up speed when it needs to, if there's high speed traffic around it, that's going to make people much more confident too. Next up, we've got improved control for nearby obstacles by predicting continuous distance to static geometry with the General Static Obstacle Network. So if we look up here, the occupancy network for close obstacles seems to tail into this one. We've got nearby obstacles. In other words, things that the car has to be paying attention to with precision because they're close by. Again, think about a parking situation where you're trying to squeeze between two cars and there's one of those, big curbs at the front or something. You want to be able to pull in at just the right angle, make sure you don't hit anything, make sure you stop before that curb, all of that kind of stuff. So you want a continuous distance prediction. Not sort of like look at it, say like it's this far away and then update again in a second. It's updating much, much more rapidly for things that are close by to keep track of them, with a great deal of attention and at a very high frame rate to make sure that it doesn't do something stupid and suddenly get way closer than it thought it was going to be because it wasn't paying attention for a second. And again, we've got the interesting word in here. It's predicting continuous distance. I don't know if that means that it's just the network's prediction or whether it's actually trying to predict into the future and say, like, if I go here, then I'll be this close or something. It could very well just be the network, the neural network. That's what they do, is they do what's called predicting, right? They infer what's going on. They predict what's going on. So they could be just saying that, but they could also be talking about a little temporal gap where it's going like, well, if I do this, I'll be this close, or if I do this, I'll be this close, right? So it could be that as well. It's a little unclear exactly what the word predicting means, but basically we're talking about it's doing this very, very rapidly and continuously to make sure that it doesn't ever get out of spec with all of the stuff that's around it when it's in a tight situation. This next one is something that we saw at AI Day 2022, which is reduced vehicle parked attribute error by 17%, achieved by increasing the dataset size by 14%, also improved brake light accuracy. So if you recall, they showed that one incident where there was a car that looked like it was about to enter traffic, but it was actually parked at a really, really awkward spot. And so essentially what they're talking about here is that they're able to understand whether a vehicle is parked or looking at getting into traffic or, occupied by a person and driving. They've reduced the mistakes between parked and unparked by 17%, which is, again, nothing to sneeze at. We're not talking about drastic improvements here, but 17% will reduce a lot of the edge cases where it was making mistakes. And again, they achieved this by increasing the data set size by 14%. Unclear how big it was before, but we're talking about a lot of data that they can throw at this because they can flag it to the fleet, say, find me incidents of this, brings it back, auto labels it, does all of that stuff. So it's very, very impressive how fast they can work on this sort of thing. And of course, they improved brake light accuracy as well. I've noticed in previous versions that when you look down at the visualization, a lot of times the car will turn on its brake lights or its turn signal, and the vehicle visualization does not show that nearly as accurately as it should. So that'll actually be a big improvement if it can understand brake lights better. Next up, we have improved clear-to-go scenario velocity error by 5% and highway scenario velocity error by 10%, achieved by tuning the loss function targeted at improving performance in difficult scenarios. So I'm going to take a guess here that what they're talking about with velocity is not the ego car's velocity, not the car that you're sitting in, but the agent cars, the other cars that are in the scene. A clear-to-go scenario is something like maybe you're trying to make a turn, let's just say a right turn, so it's relatively easy, and there's cars coming from your left. And so you've got to wait and wait and wait. And then when there's a gap, it needs to understand whether it can get out into that traffic and accelerate fast enough to be safe and make a good turn, or whether that car that's, the next car that's coming down the road is going fast enough that you need to wait for them. So, improving that velocity error, understanding how fast a far away car that's coming at you tangentially from the side is going to be a really critical thing in making it make better decisions about when to pull out into the road versus when to stay and wait. Because human beings, we don't like it, number one, if the car waits, if we're like, no, you could have gone now. That would, that gets people annoyed. But even worse, if the car pulls out in front of traffic and the people have to brake in order not to hit you, that's a really bad situation. So improving this velocity prediction error is going to make a really big difference. And of course, on highways, I assume this is highways where you're trying to enter and exit onto highways, like a highway that has a side street that comes onto it. That would be very helpful too. Or maybe they're just talking about merging onto highways. But whatever it is, improving the understanding of how fast everybody's driving by 10% will again make the car behave better in those circumstances. How did they do this? They improved the loss function. So the loss function is the way that a neural network understands whether it's done a good or a bad job effectively, right? So an easy thing might be how close are two objects, and you measure the distance between those. Often that would be squared, but whatever. But you can measure the distance and you can say like, this is this much error. And then if it's this much, it's less error and less error and less error. And when you get to 0, when they're on top of each other, then you've got really, really low error. So that's a simple loss function. It's much more complicated when you get to things like this, but clearly what they've done is whatever formula they were using to figure out how good of a job it was doing or how bad of a job it was doing, they've refined that to make it work better in these difficult scenarios. This next one is pretty self-evident. Yay. Improved detection and control for open car doors. So if somebody has a car door open and you're driving around them, hopefully the car will go a little further around it and will detect that the door is open earlier or better than it has so far. So that will definitely help, because a lot of times the Tesla Full Self-Driving likes to go around parked cars pretty close. And, so if the door is open, hopefully it will give it a wider berth and it will understand that. So that's a nice improvement. Next up, we've got improved smoothness through turns by using an optimization-based approach to decide which road lines are irrelevant for calculating, given lateral and longitudinal acceleration and jerk limits as we calculate vehicle kinematics. So just like car doors, right? Really easy to understand. Anyway, the whole point of this is smoothness. As you're making a turn through an intersection, the goal is for the vehicle to smoothly do that and not go like, right. It's a thing that's going to make the human occupants of the vehicle feel better, and probably everybody around you is going to feel more like a human being is driving that car rather than a robot driving the car. All right. So, as they're making these turns, what it's doing is it's optimizing the approach to decide which road lines are irrelevant for calculations of the path. So it's doing that based on lateral, which is side to side, and longitudinal acceleration and jerk. So remember, jerk is like the one beyond acceleration. So if you're accelerating, it's like, basically it's like a jerking or something like that. So anyway, what it's doing here is it's calculating what the car is doing. The car is going at this velocity. It's accelerating like this. It's doing these things. And given that, you can throw away some of the calculations. You don't even have to deal with lanes that the car couldn't possibly get into because it's going too fast and it's turning too fast in order to be able to go into these other lanes. And so you can throw those away and you can make the calculation much more specific. You can say, maybe you only have a choice between 2 lanes now instead of 6 lanes. And if you can throw away those other lanes, you can make the calculation, you can make the prediction much, much better than it would have been if you were having to deal with like 6 lanes the whole way through the turn and try to keep track of what was going on. So this is a very clever optimization on Tesla's part. The engineers, I got to give them really big kudos for this, because it's not obvious until you've done it. And then it's like, well, yeah, duh. If you're turning like this, the car, unless it's absolutely going to go crazy, can't get into these lanes down here because it's turning outward and it's got velocity like this. So you can throw away all the calculations of those lanes. You can just not even pay attention to them and only pay attention to the lanes that are outside the turning radius, because that's where the car might, skid or something if it was going too quickly. But anyway, given the cleverness of this, what should transpire as a passenger in the car, or a driver who's, at the steering wheel but not driving the car at the time, is that it should feel much smoother and more human than previous versions of full self-driving did. Next up is something that I think I will appreciate a lot: improved stability of the full self-driving UI visualizations. So that's not the calculations under the hood, it's what we see on the screen, by optimizing Ethernet data transfer pipeline by 15%. So I'm sure the engineering details of this are mind-bogglingly complex, but the outcome is that the visualization, the thing that you see on the screen, is being fed by the full self-driving computer via an Ethernet cable, Ethernet transfer protocol. And so what they've done is they've just improved that by 15% so you can get more stuff through, so that more data can be displayed on the screen, which should make things smoother, more stable, and make you more confident when you're looking and you're not seeing things disappearing and flickering and stuff like that. So it should make the visualization screen substantially better than it has been before. And then finally, for this potentially only partial release notes thing, and if I get more before I release this tomorrow morning, I will do an addendum and add whatever else is added. But if not, this will be the last one, because maybe it's the end. Nobody really knows. Nobody's seen the whole thing at this point. But this one is improved recall for vehicles directly behind Ego, car, again, that's you, and improved precision for vehicle detection network. So again, recall means false negatives. So what they're saying is here that your backup camera, which is only a single camera that's tucked in near where your license plate is, that thing is not going to make as many mistakes as it has in terms of not seeing vehicles that are actually there. And then I don't think this just has to do with the backup camera, but it says improved precision, I assume overall, for vehicle detection network. So that means fewer false positives in this case. It means it doesn't see fake vehicles and fake other things that are not actually there. So it might not see kind of lines on a road or a cardboard box on the side of the road and assume that's a car, right? Those would be false positives, and the vehicle could brake, or it could move out of the way or try to get around something that's not there. So that's also important. Both of these things are important. Again, you don't want to not see cars that are behind you. That would be a very bad thing. You also don't want to fake see things that are in front of you and think that those are cars, because that would be bad as well. All right, so that's what I've got so far. Again, I will add an addendum tomorrow morning if it turns out that there are more notes, but as far as we know, that's all the notes that there are with Full Self-Driving 11. It's a huge amount of stuff. Again, the really, really big ticket takeaway is that it's going to be using the Full Self-Driving beta video surround 8 camera, 360 degree, 10-second window transformer network based on the old legacy software stack that it used to be using, which probably used RNNs and single frames and things like that. So it should be substantially better when people drive it. Now, again, it's going to be 2 steps forward, 1 step back. I'm sure there's going to be a version 11.1 very, very soon, or maybe they'll call it 11.11, because Elon Musk was all about releasing it on 11/11 at 11:11 p.m. So he was clearly all about the memes about the time that they released version 11. So we could easily see the next version be called version 11.11. Who knows? But anyway, we'll find out soon enough, because I have a feeling that this will have some rough edges to it. At this point, I believe it's only higher up employees that actually have this code. And so they're driving it around, and then it will spread out to the larger, Tesla employee set. And then it will go to the OG beta testers like Chuck Cook, Omar, et cetera, et cetera. It'll go to those people and then hopefully spread out to the rest of us relatively quickly. Could take a month or so it could be a while, but I'm, fingers crossed that it'll spread quickly, because it will be fantastically good. Anyway, I'm really excited about this. It's super exciting to see these notes. I can't wait till I can try driving this myself. Honestly, if Chuck Cook gets it and it doesn't look like I'm going to get it for a while, I might drive down to Jacksonville and have him drive me around in version 11. We'll see. Anyway, in the meantime, everybody have a lovely day, and I will see you all in the next one. Bye-bye.